Hello, this is Elder of Zion. Today I would like to discuss who killed Shireen Abu Akleh. It's been a very big news story for the past several weeks, and a lot of the analysis that is been published in otherwise seemingly reputable media outlets has clearly been wrong in my opinion, and I'm going to explain exactly why and exactly why people didn't quite get it. So let's get right to it and start with the facts as we know them. On May 11th, 2022, starting at around 6 a.m., the IDF troops were performing an operation in Jenin, and there were reporters there gathered north of where the IDF troops were. There were militants around that were firing towards the IDF troops from the south. This is all verified, and I don't have time to go into detail in proving every single thing I say, but all of the stuff I'm saying over here is accepted by everybody. At around 6:30, the shots were fired towards a group of reporters and it killed Shireen Abu Akleh and injured one other. You can hear the video over here. I apologize if there's any echo here, but you could at least be able to hear. This is what the scene was right before and during the first two sets or volleys of shots. So there were two sets that you could hear over there of shots. There were also two additional shots with the same audio signature. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That happened later that seemed to be pinning down the rescuers. Okay, immediately after this happened, the Palestinians, including the reporters themselves, blamed the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, for deliberately shooting at them. The IDF, for its part, took a wait-and-see attitude. It said that it's possible, from its initial investigation, it was possible that perhaps the bullet that killed Shireen Abu Akleh was coming from their own guns. They were going to investigate it. They also said it could be an errant shot. They also floated a theory saying that there was the reason that it might be from them is that at one point there was a militant between them and the reporters that they might have shot at, and that's how it might have been mistakenly hit her. But Israel said without the bullet and doing a forensics on the bullet, they couldn't, they certainly couldn't say anything definitively, and the Palestinian Authority refused to hand it over. In fact, Israel said if it was them, they even narrowed it down to a specific rifle that would be the one at fault if it was them, but they need to see it. For various reasons, and based on the evidence that we're going to be talking about, I'm reasonably certain that even the one bullet that hit Shireen could not possibly have come from the IDF. So within about a week, and certainly from one source, and then within the 2 weeks from a couple of other sources, there was some third-party analysis on trying to figure out what exactly happened using open source materials. The major analysis was done by a Dutch-based group called Bellingcat. They do open source research. They generally do a pretty good job. And they put together all of the videos that they saw at the time that were out there. People put things on TikTok, and the people in Jenin would film their various things. And the IDF itself also had a couple of videos. They put them all together, tried to figure out where everybody was, tried to match things up with the map, try to match things up with time of day by using a tool called SunCalc that could look at shadows and based on the shadow determine what time of day it is. It's actually pretty neat. I was playing with it in order to figure something out later. But here's and what they determined was, this is a map that they made. I just modified it slightly, but it's their map showing this red circle is showing where Shireen Abu Akleh was. This green rectangle is the IDF position that was down the same street that she was in, and there were at least two groups of armed men that they put in purple and in amber. And according to their calculations, which seem to be accurate, you can verify this stuff in Google Maps and in Bing Maps, the IDF, top part of the IDF, the most northernmost part of the IDF convoy was about 200 meters from Abu Akleh, and you can measure it yourself from, she was in front of this tree. So from there to this street over here is really 200 meters. At some point, Bellingcat said 190. I'm not quite sure why, but it's 200 meters from them, and the militants were a bit further. And so as far as I know, everything over here is accurate so far. Next comes the neat part, is the audio analysis, which I'd never heard of before Bellingcat did this. They asked an expert on audio forensics, Rob Maher, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, I apologize, Rob, of Montana State University, to determine the distance of the gunshots. So this is fairly neat. What happens is when you listen to the gunshots that were happening at the time, the ones that killed Shireen and the other dozen or so shots that we just listened to, there are actually two sounds. There's a loud sound and a softer sound that is fairly consistently between 300, 310 milliseconds after the initial sound. It's not an echo. What that secondary sound is actually the gunshot from the muzzle. The first sound that you hear is the shock wave from the bullet passing nearby, because the bullets travel roughly 3 times the speed of sound. So the first sound you hear is the bullet and the shock wave, because since it's going faster than the speed of sound, it causes the shock wave. It breaks the sound barrier, so it causes that bang. And then the secondary sound that you hear is the actual muzzle shot from the gun itself. So by seeing the distance between the two, if you know the speed of the bullet, roughly you can give an estimate of how far away the shot was from the listener. This is all very cool, and when you actually do it, it depends on a few factors. It's not so simple. The general, both the militants and the IDF use both M4s and M16s. I thought the IDF only uses M16s. According to CNN, they use both, and the militants in Jenin also use both M4 and M16s. M16 is somewhat faster as far as the muzzle velocity, as far as the speed of the bullet when it gets out. They both use the same size bullets, so that's not an issue. But using the calculations that Dr. Maher of Montana State came up with, you could say that it's between, knowing these velocities of these two guns, and trying to figure out the average. At first I was trying to do it with the muzzle velocity, because I was trying to double check everything. The muzzle velocity is faster than the average velocity because the bullet slows down over time. So he explained to me, he was a very nice guy, by the way, and he explained to me exactly how he came to his estimate, and I have no reason to doubt anything that he's saying. He's very just wanted to help you with education. He was asked a question and he answered it from Bellingcat and then from CNN. Interestingly, CNN asked the question somewhat differently, so he answered it somewhat differently. But if you take the actual statistics of the speed, the average speed of a bullet coming out of an M4 and N16, the bottom line is it's between 177 and 185 meters would be the distance based on what the audio analysis is. And I verified this too. You could use tools like Audacity to be able to record and then play back and see the exact distance between the two pops from the gun and figure this out. So this is not magic. It's, all of this stuff, as much as I could, I verified. So this seems to be right. So everything that we're seeing right now, everything that Bellingcat said at this point is accurate, and it's hard to argue with. So given that, Bellingcat said, okay, here's the arc roughly, showing the two distances, the 177, and in their case they said 184. I calculated 185, but there's the distances from Shireen Abu Akleh, who was in front of the tree. Here's where the IDF was. Here's where the other two militant groups were. For sure, it's impossible that the bullet from the militant groups would have reached in that same time frame unless they have some sort of really, really super fast M16, which just doesn't exist. So the only possible conclusion that Bellingcat comes up with, and later CNN and AP as well, is that the IDF must be the shooter because there's nobody else nearby. There's nobody else even close. So, we know she was shot. She was shot by somebody. The IDF is the only group that's even in the ballpark. So therefore, it has to be IDF shots. CNN went further and they said there were those two additional shots that I mentioned that were towards the reporters that it looked like they were trying to pin down the reporters trying to rescue her. And that looks deliberate. It really does look deliberate. And at one point I actually believed this analysis. I wrote an article saying that it really sounds like it was the IDF. What was really frightening is it looks like whoever's shooting was targeting the reporters. This makes very little sense if you know anything about the IDF, but based on the evidence that we've seen, it was hard to come up with any other conclusion because nothing else makes any, it might not be perfect, but nothing else makes any more sense. However, the analysts are wrong. Even though everything that I've said so far is pretty much accurate, the conclusions are completely incorrect, and I'm going to explain exactly why. The first one is a small error, but it isn't so small. One is that Bellingcat made a mistake in saying the distance. First of all, they said that the IDF was about, they actually said 190 meters. I'm not sure why they said that the IDF was 190 meters away from Shireen. I did the calculation, there's a measuring distance tool both on Bing and on Google, and from from that tree that we know that she was in front of, going down to where the top level of where the IDF was, according to that picture, that map that Bellingcat made, that ends up being 200 meters, not 190. However, you can't measure the sound, the audio analysis can't be done from where she was shot. It has to be done from where the microphone was, because the microphone is what's picking up the two sounds. And the two sounds were therefore, the microphone was further north. The microphone is about 15 meters further north than Shireen was. Here's a picture. You can see this is the picture of, there's the tree. Here's where the camera was, where, the very bottom of this picture. That's about 15 meters. So if you add those 15 meters, it is suddenly the IDF is 215 meters away from the microphone. And that you can't fudge that anymore. This, again, the science is pretty good. The speed of sound does not vary very much. And it was an extraordinarily cold day and an extraordinarily hot day, and it obviously wasn't. So the speed of sound didn't change. The speed of the bullets really don't change that much because they're fairly consistent pattern across both the M4 and the M16. The M16, as I recall, is about 3150 feet per second at muzzle velocity. The M4 was, I think, 2970, if I remember correctly. But there's a range there, but the range is not nearly big enough to make a huge difference like that between 185 meters and 215 meters. That's just simply too big. So yes, it might be the best fit, but if it doesn't fit the science, it doesn't fit the science, even if it's only a little bit off, unless you can come up with some fudge factor. There is no fudge factor that would make up, that would manage to make that sound analysis, the audio analysis, turn into be 215 meters. So it's either yes or no, or that could be a maybe. That 215 meters makes it for sure not a maybe anymore. The IDF is literally impossible with the known bullets that we have and the known speeds that we have of the bullets that the IDF uses, that it could be the IDF shooting it. So now we have a problem. Who could have been? And that's really the problem altogether, is that since the analysts who really are dying to come up with an answer can't figure anything better out, they're trying to say, well, it must be the IDF because it can't be anybody else. However, there is somebody else it could be. The basic assumption is that there were no other armed groups. That's what they say. They only look at the two armed groups that were directly south. AP says the only confirmed presence of Palestinian militants was on the other side of the convoy, so 300 meters away. And CNN says there was no active combat nor any Palestinian militants near Abu Akleh in the moments leading up to her death. They are lying. AP might not be lying. Maybe AP might just be mistaken. CNN, as we're going to see, is lying. There were other armed groups, and I'm going to explain exactly how we know why. One is this video, and it has some stupid music, but we're going to play it anyway. Okay, here you clearly see people with guns. It was geolocated to this area over here. Now it's hard, I'm not sure how easily you can see this, but Shireen was killed up here in this yellow circle, and the militants were like walking down this road over here. And that's where they were. And so we have another set of militants, and here's another picture of them. Not sure whether it was earlier or later in the day, but here's 15 or so militants walking down the street with guns. Same street, same section. Here's the corner that is over here. So directly to the southeast of where the reporters and where Shireen was. So suddenly we have some other people. And the important thing is, these other people were within that 177 to 185 meters. Here's my picture. This is not exact, but it's pretty close of showing, you know, roughly where that is. So down, and they were walking down this street, and that's exactly in the arc of the 177, 185 meters from where the microphone was. So it's, you know, the IDF wasn't. IDF was down here, but these guys definitely passed by. So if just based on nothing else, you know, this is literally the only group of people with guns that we know of that were in a position to shoot Shireen Abu Akleh from that distance. There is nobody else. The IDF or the other two militant groups, it wasn't them. This is the only group we know of at this moment that could do it. How they did it, we don't know. Whether they had line of sight, we don't know. You know, I was looking, there aren't that great pictures from there, from the bottom here. I think there's line of sight. This is a cemetery over here. There may be line of sight from up here, but that's too close. And it's hard, and there's a wall over here, so it's not simple. At this point, you know, it's hard to solve that problem, but there are other pictures from Jenin showing, you know, people taking photos or taking video through holes in the walls. You know, it's crumbling infrastructure. It's a refugee camp, or a so-called refugee camp. So yeah, and there are holes in walls that are used by snipers and things like that. So it's unclear unless somebody checks it, and obviously CNN and AP didn't bother checking for things like that. But at the moment, as far as the science is concerned, the only group that fits is this group over here. But there's more. There's a video here. This video was taken literally 3 to 4 minutes before Shireen Abu Akleh was shot. This is this, and you can see, and the video moves on into that area of when she was shot. This is just an earlier part of the same video. It was published by Middle East Eye. Let me show you what this is, and you can read the subtitles. The subtitles were an expert that I know on Arabic said that this was a little hard for him because the dialect, there's a specific West Bank dialect that the people had. He gave it to another expert he knew. So this is the transcription, and they couldn't hear it very well, but this is the transcription of what they could hear, of what he could hear from this video. This is very, very important.
هاي القناص هي القناص هي القناص هضمني اسمع في قناص بيضطر هيو زاد من هاي في ضوء في بطار هي على شو اسمه اللي قالوا عنها لا دول شباب اللي طوموا بس نزلوا في ضوء في الانشاء في هون وفي هون.
Okay. Two things that are very, very important over here. One is that these people, I'm not sure if they're journalists or residents, because there was like a residence that would hang out with the journalists, and you know, I think that the person that was filming is a resident of Jenin. But he's pointing out, and the journalist or whoever is answering the question is pointing out, look at all these snipers. And he's not talking about Israeli snipers. He's not talking about IDF. IDF didn't take over buildings. He's talking about militants. He's saying, you know, Shabab. He's talking about, which is the youth. The youth militants are called the Shabab. And he is, and he's pointing, look at it, over there, over there, over there. This one's in a building. Here's in a building that's being constructed. You know, multiple snipers that are around that are meant to, you know, shoot the IDF when they come by. So there's so it's clear, and the thing about snipers, you see, the questions that we had about the other group of militants that were walking down that street go away because snipers are in buildings. They're on upper floors. There's certainly line of sight from upper floors, and I identified at least one building, perhaps two, that were exactly in that Goldilocks zone. That you know, that is not only in the perfect zone of it, but it also would be a perfect place to put a sniper because it had an easy view. If the IDF would have gone north one more block, they would have been able to take pot shots at the IDF from there. So that's one super important thing to say. All of a sudden, we know that there are snipers, and they're pointing southeast. This reporter this journalist is pointing southeast exactly to where it would be, so that a southeasterly bullet is not going to be so difficult, it's so easy to tell the difference from a southern bullet that comes from the south. So this is all adding up to more likely seeing that some snipers might have been doing this. We still don't know the reason. We don't know anything like that. But the other important thing is that you heard gunshots during this little video clip. Again, as I told you, this clip was only done about 3 minutes before she was killed. Right now, the articles you can look up today from CNN and AP and other places say, oh, there was no gunfire whatsoever. The gunfire came out of nowhere. Nobody was shooting anything beforehand. But here, we heard gunshots, and one of them I did measure. It was a little further away. It was like 350 milliseconds, so it was probably, I don't know what that comes out to, 220 or so meters. So, but nevertheless, there were other, the militants are wandering around. They're trigger happy. They're shooting, when they see something or when they feel like it. So this video completely demolishes everything that we were seeing from CNN and AP and from Bellingcat, because they didn't even consider that there were other people that were within that zone of distance of where the gunshot must have come from. So so those are the snipers. So the IDF, once you think about it, and again, so one of the reasons that that CNN and not really Bellingcat, but CNN was the first that, besides the Palestinians themselves, CNN was the first one that actually directly accused Israel of deliberately shooting. Besides the fact that it was out of the estimated range, it makes no sense that the IDF would do it. The only reason that Bellingcat and everybody else were saying that it's probably the IDF is because they couldn't even imagine anybody else that could have done it, because they are only aware of what they were aware of, which were the two other militant groups. So but think about it. The IDF was shooting mostly towards the south, because that's where the other groups were. So all of a sudden, this professional army that's trained to go into Jenin for a very specific purpose of being able to, whatever I don't even know what the purpose of this one raid was, to arrest somebody or whatever it was. But they have to be shooting to the south. They're going to turn around and shoot to the north to kill a reporter, or to to go the other direction. It doesn't make any sense. And it's a professional army. People who hate Israel and people who hate the IDF, they treat it as if they are, they're just a bunch of babies who just, shoot whoever they feel like, because they're just because they feel like it, or they're just, angry at them, or they're jealous of, so whatever ridiculous things you do. That's not the way an army works. And anybody that knows anything about the military knows discipline is what a way a military works. If you're going to be an effective army, I mean, not a group of terrorists, not a group of people that get together with guns, but a real professional army, you can't just start shooting people whenever you feel like it. You know that even if you do, there's going to be a huge inquiry, and your life is going to be hell, because there's going to be you could have a danger of going to jail. You have a danger of being taken off of duty. I mean, it's just like a nutty thing to think that they just trigger happy IDF soldiers. It's not it. And they know the laws of armed conflict. And listen, the reporters themselves said, we let the IDF know where we were. We made sure we were visible to them, so they wouldn't do that. These reporters go every day for decades. They all cover these sort of things. All of a sudden, the IDF is going to shoot at them. It makes no sense. It's certainly the IDF wouldn't start pinning down people that are trying to rescue. It really doesn't make sense that they would do that sort of thing. Why on earth? It doesn't help them at all. They have nothing to gain by shooting an Al Jazeera reporter. I mean, there's not just people will say, oh, because they want to silence her. That's absurd. Look at the publicity that came afterward. It makes them look bad. If even there's the slightest chance that they did it, it's they gain nothing. They have tons to lose from something like this. And okay, maybe if they were shooting, at a militant that popped his head out of bushes, and it actually, and it bounced and it ricocheted and it hit, Abu Akleh. Okay, maybe that makes sense. But listen, we heard the gunshots. We could do the analysis of the gunshots. It wasn't a ricochet. A ricochet would not sound like that. It would slow down the bullet too much, so you wouldn't have that same effect. The bullets were not from the IDF. They were still fast enough that they came directly from a source. The IDF source, I'm not convinced, had the line of sight over here. And this is a minor point because this is just me. Um, there's clearly was a line of sight to Shireen, but there's a famous tree that has 3 gunshots in it that the Palestinians show everybody saying it's 3 IDF. This is the best angle I could find. It's not the greatest, but here is what it looks like from directly behind the tree. And the IDF tanks and stuff are just not visible. Now, again, there's this brush in the way, so it's not, I can't say this 100%, but it's a much narrower line of sight to that tree than it would be to Shireen, who is presumably standing in the street. So again, and maybe they did 1 errant shot, but there's no way that IDF did 14 shots in that direction. It makes absolutely no sense. When you look at the militants, they're literally the only ones that were in the proper range. So the snipers easily could be in one of the buildings that are in the proper range, and the rest of the militants, we know where we saw them in the proper range. The tree bullet holes that I just mentioned, here's the top, the highest bullet hole in the tree. You could see, because of the wall behind them, that you could see it's facing almost exactly to the east as opposed to the south. There were 2 other bullet holes that were sort of in the corner, side of the tree, but there was one here that's directly here. If it was an IDF shot, it would be a bit glancing blow off the tree. It wouldn't look like this. It wouldn't be like a reasonably circular removal of the bark. So it's not, southeast makes sense. This is a minor point, but whatever. It's just something I threw in there. As I said, Shabab literally means youth. They're trigger happy kids with guns, with very good guns. What's more likely, that they would be shooting fairly wildly, or they would shoot at anything that moves? It's possible, somebody mentioned this theory, and I think it's very reasonable, that perhaps her helmet popped up above the wall. There was like a tarp, actually not a wall, but there's like a tarp that was opposite her in that street. So maybe her person only saw the helmet and thought it was IDF and just started shooting immediately. Or again, people say, oh, IDF did it on purpose, which makes no sense. But if you think that the IDF would have done this on purpose, there's a lot more incentive for the Palestinian militants to do it on purpose. I'm not saying they did, but if you are going to entertain the theory that the IDF wanted to shut her up or to silence her or to kill her on purpose for whatever reason, look at what happened. They, making it look like the IDF would shoot her and killing her otherwise is a huge win from a PR perspective. So again, I'm not saying the Palestinians did that, but if you want to look for incentive or a reason that why people might have done it on purpose, it makes a lot more sense that Palestinians would do it. It makes 0 sense, negative sense for for Israel to do it. There's still lots of questions, of course. We still don't know line of sight. We still don't know if it was the snipers or the people that were on the street. I think the snipers make more sense. But this is the IDF literally makes no sense. They were literally outside of the range. It could not be them. And this is just a point with open source. Open source researchers still have biases. When they spend all this time looking and picking up videos from TikTok and from Facebook and from and pictures that people take and on social media and everything like that. And when they spend so much time doing it, they start getting a sense that, oh, now I have all the information. Now I have everything. They have maybe 5% of the information. They don't have anything. But they're they're so dedicated and they have such a desire to try to solve a problem. Hey, we have a problem. Who shot her? We want to get an answer. We want to get it fast so we can, move on to the next thing. And they don't think that they don't have all the information. There's a little bit of hubris over there. And once the theory comes up saying, hey, look at this, look at the distance, IDF is the only one that sort of fits it, then all the rest of the evidence they look at is confirmation bias. It's not actually saying, oh, can we see if this is wrong? They're saying, well, let's try to come up with reasons to say it's right. So they come up with these, halfway theories that sort of, they pretend that it supports their initial analysis. But they're not trying, they're not looking at it purely objectively at that point. And again, this is a human nature. People want to fit points to a line. You have a bunch of data points. You want to fit one straight line or one nice curve that explains all the data points. And that's a normal thing that we try to do. Okay, what sort of fits the most of the data that we have? And they figure, okay, it must be that. But in this case, the audio analysis is, it works both ways. It's like, it's not only that it's accurate, that it tells you, that it can exclude the Palestinian militants to the south, which it could, but it's accurate enough that it excludes the IDF also, especially once you include the fact, and this was a major mistake on Bellingcat's site, that the IDF was not just like 10 meters away from the top estimate of the distance, but it was really like 35. It's a huge difference. And then when they're doing it, they don't know the IDF. They don't know IDF procedures. They don't know IDF discipline. That's not to them. That's not a fact. They're only looking for bullet speeds and distances and where people are and all that sort of stuff. They're only looking for they're not looking at psychology, and because to them that doesn't matter. But the fact is, it does matter when you have a professional army going against a bunch of criminals, a bunch of terrorists. Yes, it makes a huge difference because the professional army has not just no incentive, they just don't work that way. Is it possible there's a rogue here and there every once in a while? Yeah, it sometimes happens. But the people that are being sent into battle, a very specific type of team and a very specific group of fighters who are, who are optimized to work this sort of thing, to think that they're just going to start turning around and shooting reporters, come on, that's absurd. That doesn't even enter the analysis of the open source analysts. So in conclusion, the analysts who came up with this thing, whether it was the amateurs from Bellingcat or their supposedly professionals from CNN and AP, they either didn't have or they ignored, in the case of CNN, the stronger counter evidence. And the fact that CNN knew it, one of the writers of that article definitely knew that about this other group of people, and he knowingly ignored it. And if he tried to say that, oh, that video wasn't taken at the same time of day I did the time analysis, it was. The only theory that makes sense is that it's Palestinian militants killed Shireen. Not that we know why, but the only thing that makes sense. And when it comes down to it, the Palestinian refusal to let anybody else even look at the bullet helps, prove that case, because if the PA was as convinced, they put out their own report and they said, oh, definitely Israel, and they said it was from a Ruger, which Israel doesn't use. I mean, it was just absurd stuff. But if they were so certain that they knew exactly what happened, they would have no problem handing the bullet over to the United States or taking a high resolution picture of the bullet and publishing it so nobody can modify it or anything like that. And and then we could prove, we would know, okay, was it Israel or not? And they don't want to do that because they don't want to prove that it's their side. They've already, for them, this is a propaganda victory already. Why on earth would they want to do anything to jeopardize that? So the truth is not their friend at this point. So that's my analysis. It went on a bit longer than I expected, but I just wanted to make sure people understand. And this still isn't everything. I've been spending a lot of time on this. There are a lot of little details here and there. This is the important stuff, though. And if if I'm wrong anywhere, please let me know. But I just do not see how this could possibly be wrong. There's the only thing that makes any sense, unless there's another group of other people shooting from some other direction we don't know of. This is the only thing that makes sense, that it's the Jenin militants that killed Shireen Abu Akleh, and people should be angry at the Jenin militants that are killing her, that killed her, whether it's on purpose or not. People are misplacing their anger to Israel, which they're going to do anyway. What do you want to, that's life. But the fact is, this is not Israel's fault. This is the fault of these trigger-happy kids that were sitting in Jenin. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. And we will talk to you next time. Thanks. Bye.